I'd like to start with the photograph. Tiger Woods is teeing off in 2010 at the Celtic Manor Golf Course in Wales. He's on the 18th hole, and he's playing for the Americans as they try and win back the Ryder Cup against the Europeans. He mistimes his shot, and the ball careers off to the left-hand side. And through a completely amazing coincidence, he drives it directly at the lens of photographer Martin Payne. Payne captures one of the most iconic pictures in the history of sports, literally the nanosecond when the ball is midpoint between Tiger Woods with that intense gaze and the photographer's lens. But the reason I've picked this photograph isn't because of the golf ball or isn't because of Tiger Woods. It's because of a member of the spectators who you may be able to spot in that front row. Look carefully at the spectators and somebody will stand out. Let me help you. It's this guy here. He became known as Cigar Man. No one knew who he was or why he was dressed like that. Let me zoom in a little bit. He's wearing, if you haven't noticed, a ginger wig, a fake Harpo Marx mustache, and he's carrying in his mouth a joke unlit cigar. And the look on his face is interesting because he's the only person out of 500 people in the shot that's not looking at the golf ball, he's looking straight at the camera. Who is that man? And more importantly, what is that strange look on his face? A combination of humor, bewilderment, confusion, perhaps stupidity. This was Cigar Man. But this is also how I feel when I look at social media in Australia. I feel bewildered. I feel confused. I feel like I'm the only one in the crowd that sees something that no one else is looking at. Maybe I am, like Cigar Man, crazy. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we'll find out this afternoon. But this is my social media face. And I get it every time I look at social media data, presentations, arguments, case studies. And the face comes with a noise. And the noise I make is, huh? Because it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Now, maybe it's me. But let's see. I can tell you the first time I felt like Cigar Man. It was almost 2 years ago. I was in America, and I was watching the Super Bowl, which, as you know, is the great final of the American Football League. And as you may know, during the Super Bowl last year, the lights went out. There was a power shortage, and for 30 minutes, the whole stadium went dark, and the game had to stop. And into that darkness, there was a famous marketing moment. Oreo, the cookie company, who had 18 people in their social media team that evening, preparing their social media strategy, saw an opportunity and sent out a tweet during the blackout. And the tweet said, very simply, power out, no problem. And there was a link to a picture. Back then, you couldn't just put a picture in your Twitter, you had to click on the link. If you clicked on the link, it revealed a rather humorous picture, which is a little picture of an Oreo cookie, and underneath it said, you can still dunk in the dark. Lovely little bit of agile marketing. But what followed next is all the bullshit that I hate about social media. That tweet became known as the tweet that was heard around the world. And everyone in America, in Europe, in Australia wrote about it. In Wired magazine, they talked about how Oreo won the marketing Super Bowl with a timely blackout ad on Twitter. In another magazine, Ad Exchanger, they said Oreo's overnight success was 100 years in the making. In the Wall Street Journal, how Oreo culture-jacked the Super Bowl. In CNET, how Oreo's brilliant blackout tweet won the Super Bowl. In the UK, you need to be agile, Oreo style. In our own BRW here in Australia, taking the biscuit, how Oreo's blackout tweet trumped millions of million-dollar Super Bowl ads. And when finally the Oreo tweet was given one of the highest prizes in the 2013 Advertising Awards, 13 different executives from Oreo claimed credit for that 18-word tweet. That's 1.25 words per person. Let's talk about that tweet. Let's not be lazy journalists. Let's talk about it. Let's break down the numbers. Let's do what we never do in this world. Let's compare it to traditional media. So, on the morning that they sent that tweet, Oreo had 65,000 followers on Twitter. Of course, that's already a small number, but we've also got to ask how many people not only got the tweet, but clicked on the link, because back then you had to click on the link to see the actual ad, right? So we have to know what a click-through rate would be for Twitter. Do you know what the click-through rate average is for Twitter? You don't hear that figure very often, do you? There's a nice little bit of data at the moment. The average Twitter click-through rate is 1.64%. But as you follow that list down, if you look down here, big brands on Twitter with more than 10,000 followers, the click-through rate goes down to 0.45%. Get used to that decimal point and all the numbers being behind it, because the one thing that is consistent across all of social media is always behind the decimal point. You're going to see it 10 times in this talk. So, the average click-through rate for a brand like Oreo with 65,000 followers is 0.45%. So that means, we calculated through, it's not a complex calculation, that the average click-through rate should be 0.45. But I want to be generous this afternoon. I'm conscious we have social media people in the room, and I don't want to do you a disservice. So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give you a 2% click-through rate, because it was dark, people were bored. Even with a 2% click-through rate, that means 1,300 of Twitter's followers would have seen that ad that night. 1,300. But I hear the social media gang say, but you're forgetting about amplification. Retweets. You're absolutely right. What was the amplification on that rather clever tweet? Well, it was significant. It was retweeted 15,000 times. So now it's getting interesting. 15,000 retweets. The average American has 208 followers in the United States, which means that 15,000 retweets went to 15,000 times 208 people, which is more than 3 million people. Now we're getting somewhere. This is a decent number, right, for something like the Super Bowl. But you know, we've got to think about that horrible click-through rate again, because you couldn't see the picture without clicking on the link. So we've got to multiply it by 2%, which gives us about 63,000 people. So now we add 63,000 to 1,300, and we get about 64,000 people, total reach for the picture. 64,000. Guess what the customer base is for Oreo in the United States? Guess how many people buy Oreos every year in America? 40 million people. So of the 40 million people that theoretically were targeting at Oreo, 64,000 saw that tweet, or about 0.02% of their target market. Get used to that decimal point. You're going to see it again. Let's talk about a brand we don't talk about as much as Oreo because it's not as cool. Let's talk about Budweiser. Budweiser are a little bit behind Oreo. They don't use as much social media. They use a little bit, but they don't focus on it so heavily. Budweiser did something very curious last year at the Super Bowl. They paid for a TV ad, a 60-second TV ad. Disgusting, isn't it? 20th century, so old-fashioned. Let me show you Budweiser's 60-second TV ad, which ran last year during the Super Bowl.
Took my love, took it down. Climbed a mountain and I turned around. Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I've built my life around you. But time makes you bolder, even children get older, and I'm getting older too. Take my love, take it down. And if you see my reflection in the snow-covered hills, well, a landslide will bring it down.
It's a great ad. It's a great ad. You know how many people watched the Super Bowl last year on CBS? 108 million people. You know how many people watched the ads? Eyes on screen? It's very high because the Super Bowl is a very high ad watching period. 47%. You know how many people saw that ad last year? 50 million people. Now compare the creative. That's 60 seconds long. Takes a second to read that Oreo tweet. 60 seconds of beautiful, brand-specific magic. It has moving parts, colors, sound, emotion. And it's 3 million times better when it comes to creative impact. My point isn't to say that Oreo weren't clever or effective in their tweet. My point isn't to criticize Twitter or, for that matter, Oreo. My point is to say, on which bloody planet does that tweet beat that ad? For reach, for impact, for value, for brand centricity. And the planet is the one we live on, which is hugely biased towards social media. But apparently, according to BRW, Oreo's blackout tweet trumped those $1 million Super Bowl ads. Lazy, inaccurate journalism, giving marketers completely the wrong impression. And my response to that is, huh? But no one else says anything, just me. So maybe I am crazy. You know, social media has big numbers, and they're impressive numbers. You'll hear them many, many times, almost on a daily basis in Australia. Twitter, fabulous tool, 284 monthly active users around the world, 250 million people. Here in Australia, almost 3 million Australians active on Twitter. 12%, many of you in this room, including myself, active on Twitter. That's a phenomenal number. Facebook, as we know, even more impressive. 1.35 billion monthly active users. Here in Australia, 13 million people in the population. 49% of the Australian population, adult population, active on Facebook. Half the population. 49% of Australians are active on Facebook. That's a phenomenal, phenomenal impact. But let's think carefully about social media. I, like you, work in marketing. I'm not in the business of human communication. I'm in the business of brand communication. And I think we have to be cautious with these numbers. I think we have to recognize, first of all, that social media has changed this world forever. As a communication tool between people, it is an astonishing revolution, and I would be a moron to even think or suggest that it hasn't. Social media has changed the world. But I'm a marketing professor and I don't care. I'm talking about what social media will do for the brands that I work for and the brands that you work for. That's what I'm interested in. Now again, when we talk about brands using social media, we have to split this up. There are some companies using social media as a form of qualitative research. It's a little tool. It's kind of like a digital focus group. It's kind of cool, useful. And there are other companies, we could talk about Telstra, who use social media as a small addendum to their service, and it works very nicely there too. I want to talk today exclusively about what most people talk about in these conferences when they talk about social media. How social media is being used by brands to communicate to your target consumers. Okay? That's going to be my focus today. So let's have a look at that. As you may know, Brand Finance, which is a wonderful valuation firm, every year works out the biggest brands in Australia. You know, Interbrand do it for the whole world. Brand Finance does it just for Australian brands. They work out the 10 most valuable brands in Australia. Here's the list for this year. At the top, according to Brand Finance this year, Woolworths is the strongest brand in Australia, most valuable. Now, you might be surprised to see BHP Billiton there, for example. It doesn't mean BHP Billiton is a stronger brand than Coles. It means the value of that brand, because you have to take the brand equity multiplied by the revenues of the company to get the value, gives you your value. But this is a good proxy. These are the 10 biggest brands in Australia this year. And what I thought it might be interesting is, rather than talking about American brands or giving you a few rare case studies of what Starbucks or Oreo or Coke are doing in the States, let's look at the 10 biggest Australian brands and look at their performance on social media. Let's look at how many Facebook likes they have. I'm not going to talk about BHP or Rio Tinto. They're not on Facebook, first of all. And also they're B2B companies. Let's just look at the 8 big consumer brands, okay? Here's the numbers. That's how many likes these brands have. Quite impressive. Woolworths at the top, more than 700,000 likes. Telstra, 164,000. Coles, 800,000. You get the idea. Now, at this point, if I was a social media person, I'd talk to you about engagement rates. What proportion of my Facebook likes are active this week? I don't care about that. I'm a marketing person. I care about how many of my customers are active. I don't choose to just look at social media metrics. I look at the business metrics. So let me share with you the total number of customers that each of those brands has according to their own data. And suddenly, the Facebook performance isn't billions, it's a tiny fraction of the market. I've actually calculated it for you here. Woolworths has 3% of its market liking it on Facebook. Telstra has 1%. These numbers aren't so impressive. We're no longer talking about 49% of the population, we're talking about 1 or 2. And so the first big observation is, from these top 10 brands, the average brand of the big boys at least, averages about 2 to 3% of their total customers on Facebook. We hear all the time about this is a great conversation that social media can have between brands and customers. Well, it's a bloody quiet conversation because 97.5% of these customers aren't listening, aren't talking. You ever see that statistic before? Might be a surprise to some of you. But of course, I'm being far too generous to Facebook. 4 years ago, my wife saw a recipe on Woolworths. She really liked it, and she liked the brand. She's not been back to the site since. She would count in one of those 721,000. What we care about here, of course, is how many of these customers are actually engaged currently or recently with Facebook. What's been the impact recently? What has Facebook done for these brands recently? So we have to say goodbye to these small but okay numbers because they're the history of the brand. Most of these guys are sleeping. They're no longer active. We have to replace it with the current engagement numbers. These are the customers in the last 7 days that have actively engaged with these brands on Facebook. In the case of Woolworths, 8,500. The case of Telstra, 1,900. In the case of NAB, 276. And so we've got to change our percentages to this. 0%. Well, 0.02% to be fair. Virtually no one. We should give a special shout out to NAB. 276 people active. They have 12 million customers. It's particularly interesting because, as you may know, NAB committed a few years ago to get serious about social and put 6 people in their social media team. 6 people in the social media team, 270 engaged customers. Make a humble suggestion to NAB. I wouldn't bother with Facebook. I'd just get them all to ring someone for 2 hours each day. Let me put it into perspective. Let's take Woolworths, the biggest brand in Australia this year. In the last week, 8,500 Woolworths customers engaged with Woolworths on Facebook. In that same week, 21 million customers visited a Woolworths store, which means that 1 in every 2,500 Woolworths shoppers engaged with the brand. If you would like a graphical representation of that, it looks like that. Huh? I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Joke's on you. Joke's on me. Now, I can hear Facebook say, yes, but hang on. You're just looking at the likes. You're not looking at Facebook as an advertising medium. And they'd be right. More and more, Facebook is seeing itself more as an advertising media. All this stuff about conversations, about avoiding the horrible advertising model, about establishing a dialogue and a relationship with the customer, they've kind of forgotten about that in the last few years and have just talked about cost per thousand, click-through rate, 0.3%. Right? You buy access to customers. Now, in theory, if it was working, you'd see those like figures going up, right? Which we aren't. And also, this isn't what social media was presented to you as. This isn't how it's promoted in the media. It's not advertising. It's something better than advertising. I'm not the only one saying this. Nate Elliott from Forrester last year said, Facebook's shift from free organic reach to paid reach means that Facebook has abandoned social marketing it always promised brands to the type of advertising model that brands can already buy on Yahoo, NBC, and elsewhere. And he went further. Our research says brands are buying ads despite the fact they're not happy with the switch and despite the fact those ads aren't working, as well as the ads they buy elsewhere. The only question is, when will spending patterns shift to reflect this? Nate Elliott isn't anyone. He's the head of social media analysis at Forrester, the world's most advanced digital analysis firm. Let's look at Twitter. Again, a good tool for social communication, and we'll find even smaller numbers. Same brands, same customers. Here's the followers on Twitter of the top 10 brands. As a percentage, 0. 0.0 something. To be fair, ANZ. If you actually run the numbers on that one, they have 41,000 followers after 5.5 years on Twitter, which means that actually the figure correctly stated is 0.7%, which those of you with a background in statistics will know we have to round up to 1. And so I congratulate ANZ as the Australian champions of Twitter for achieving a 1% share of their customers on social media in the form of Twitter. But again, don't talk about the 1, talk about the 99 that aren't on there. And again, I say to you, huh? Now maybe you've seen this before, maybe it's occurred to you before, maybe someone's talked to you about it before, I'm not sure, I don't see it anywhere. So big numbers, no question. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, a lot of them, great numbers, but great numbers for social communication. Small numbers when it comes to brand communication. Millions and billions become thousands. 49% becomes 0.7%. And this is the real story of social media for marketers. And the point I'm trying to make to you is social media is an amazing tool, but as the name suggests, a social, person-to-person medium. Brands are the third wheel. And while they can exact some value from this, it's not as much as you've been told. Let me prove it to you a different way. The small numbers that you see from brands contrast with the enormous numbers achieved by people, in this case on Twitter. Here are the top 10 Australians on Twitter. Entities, brands, everything. Cody Simpson, 5 Seconds of Summer, Hugh Jackman, Luke Hemmings, Callum Hood. I have no idea who any of these people are. But what I do know is they're getting millions of followers, where brands are getting thousands of followers. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is social media is a social media. It's not a brand media. Let me prove it to you. You have to go all the way down to number 42 to find a brand rather than a person that has the biggest follower on Twitter, and you'll get to the Australian Open at position number 43. Social media is about me and you talking. Brands, for the most part, aren't welcome here. And that makes sense. The dictionary definition of social media: websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. Social networking. Networks between people. Let me put it another way. How is it possible for a relatively unknown professor like me, most of you have never heard of me, to achieve a grand total of 40,000 followers on Twitter? Well, partly it's because I bought 25,000 last year, but we won't talk about that. I did it for an article I was writing on fake followers. I'm not the only one, by the way. But if you analyze those followers, 10,000 of them are genuine, real human beings. I've managed to get 10,000 followers on Twitter. It's amazing, right? That's more than Bendigo Bank, Breville, Bow Repairs, VB, BT, Tim Tam, Suncorp, Kmart. Oh, wait. Combined. How is that possible? How is that possible? It's possible because social media is for people talking to people, not for brands talking to people. It's been missold to you. Social media is a social media. Now, to be fair, there is a small minority of users that do, on occasion, as you see here, use social media to follow brands. This is a good bit of research done by Census last year. What you see is around 20% of social media users are using it at least a little bit to follow brands. I would draw your attention to the 80% who aren't, and the fact that most people are using it as a social media. Social media isn't being used much by brands. This is data from 2014 Australia Experian. 66% of Australians are not actively following any brand on social media. Remember the last time you heard that statistic? You didn't. No one would talk about it. It's not cool. It's not trendy. It's the wrong thing to say. Even Experian try and hide the data in the footnotes of their table. And what you learn is, of the 34% who are following a brand, 83% follow less than 7 brands. And if you look at the demographic splits, it ain't changing much from old to young. Millennials are the same as old people. Social media is for people. It's not for brands. And if you run the numbers properly on this, do you know what you discover? The average Australian consumer is exposed to more than 10,000 brands a year, and the average Australian consumer 94% of them, at least, has less than one brand that they follow on social media. Again, behind the decimal point. When was the last time you heard that little bit of data? It's from Experian. Didn't make it up. Huh? The reason you don't know any of this data is because there is an enormous media bias in Australia, a quantitative media bias, where all they talk about is social media, despite the fact it's a tiny little tool. I did a content analysis of the 3 big marketing titles, at least the 3 that I read: Ad News, B&T, Mumbrella. And I looked for how many articles talk about social media or any of the social media tools, and I compared it with how many articles last year talked about traditional media and any of the traditional marketing tools. You know what I found? For the whole of 2013, it's almost 50-50. 48% of the articles you read in Mumbrella, B&T, are about social, and 52% about the more traditional, above-the-line tools. That's fair, right? Half and half. You know what proportion of marketing budgets last year were spent on social media? 5%. 5% of the investment, 50% of the coverage. It's no wonder our marketers are spending more. They've got the illusion that social media is a much bigger tool than it is. Again, my point isn't that it isn't useful, but it's a small tool for most of you. And there are other tools that are more important. It's not just quantitative. There's a strong qualitative media bias here in Australia in the media too. We're told that click-through rates are up by 150%, but the article never mentions that the average click-through rate is still only 0.45%. We're told Facebook is checked by 9 million Australians every day, but no one tells you what I just told you, that the vast majority of them don't check any brands. We're told, here's a great case study from Starbucks or Coca-Cola, all these wonderful exceptional brands, outlier brands from other countries, but no one mentions the piss-poor results of Australian brands on social media. We don't talk about it. We're told that Facebook is superior to Twitter. But if you notice, in all these social media league tables, they never compare apples to apples. They never compare Facebook to TV advertising. Never compare Twitter to radio. Never compare search to Pinterest, because if they did that, it wouldn't look as good. I'm tired of it. You should be tired of it too. And you should look beyond it to form a more objective viewpoint. I'm also sick of something else. I'm sick of these brands. I'm sick of these media titles. I'm sick of social media agencies talking about the imminent death of traditional media. I'm old, I'm fat, and I'm grey, but it doesn't mean that I'm not right. Thank you, Generation X. I knew you were with me. We'll explain it, the rest of you, to the millennials later on. TV is dead, we are told, every single day. TV is dead. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, remember this? In 2013, YouTube has already replaced TV. TV is dead. 2013. On Monday, an article in Business Insider, the era of TV's media dominance will come to an end in 2016. Bullshit. Bullshit. You know how much TV watching we're doing this year compared to last year? The same. For the last 5 years of the so-called social media revolution, TV viewing has changed not one dot. Objective data, OzTam data. Australians watch the same amount of TV now as they did 5 years ago. It's bullshit. When did anyone tell you that? Oh, they're watching it on TV as well. Interesting fact. The average Aussie this year, according to OzTam, will watch 105 hours of video content per month, okay? Any video of any kind. I'm talking about free-to-air TV, Fox, YouTube, digital, DVDs, Apple TV, anything with a moving image. 105 hours according to OzTam. An hour and 46 minutes a month of that will be done on a tablet. An hour and 56 will be done on a smartphone. 7 hours and 48 minutes of it will be done on a PC or a laptop, and 93 hours of it will be done on a television, a TV set. In the UK, it's even higher, 98%. In Australia, Australians will watch almost 90% of their video content this year on a television set. TV isn't dead. It's been augmented a little bit. The world ain't changing as much as they're telling you. TV is not a dying tool. Look at Budweiser. And we're told radio is dying. Poor old radio, nearly finished, right? Marketing magazine here in Australia, the radio ad decline carries over to the new year. The Australian, free-to-air radio next in line to see advertising crumble. Bullshit. Here's radio penetration and reach over the last 10 years. It matches the Australian population growth almost exactly. You know what PwC predicts over the next 4 years? Radio will grow at a compound annual growth rate of over 3%. Any business would be happy with that. Radio isn't just dead, it's doing really well. But not if you believe the bullshit that you're told in the media at the moment. Why don't we do something that no one does in social media? Why don't we compare Facebook with radio? We all know the Facebook statistics. 49% of Australians are on Facebook every week. They spend an amazing 8 hours a week on Facebook. It's astonishing when you compare it to Pinterest or Twitter. Let's compare it to radio. 75% of Australians listen to radio each week. 50% more reach than Facebook. You know, on average, how much time they spend listening to radio each week? 19 hours. Commercial plus non-commercial. Seen that statistic lately? No, of course, because radio's dead, right? Facebook's replacing it. Not true. Bullshit. It's data from GfK, from the annual National Radio Survey. I didn't make it up. Let's do it for search. My point here isn't to hammer digital, by the way. I love digital. I just think social's a tiny part of it. And it's not just the old traditional tools like radio and TV that are being misrepresented by social media. Even within digital, we have social and we have the more traditional forms of digital tools like good old-fashioned search engine optimization. Remember that one from the noughties? SEO, AdWords, Google search. When was the last time you heard about that at a marketing conference? Old school stuff, right? Adobe does a lovely piece of research every Christmas on holiday online shopping here in Australia, in America, and in Europe. And they look at billions of transactions online. And they work out where did the person who came from another site, where did they come from when they came to a site to buy something online? Beautiful data from billions of transactions. During 2013, during the holiday period, 40% of those visits were direct. I typed in www Louis Vuitton and I bought something. 36% came from search. I typed into Google Louis Vuitton handbags and it took me to the Vuitton site. 20% came from other websites, referring sites, recommending. And for social media, a grand total of 0.9%. Told you to get used to that decimal point. So around about 36 times more customers are delivered by search than they are by social media. When did you last hear that one? My response is, huh? There's a great analyst in the US called Nathan Safran, no relation to our Safran. He wrote a beautiful article last year which was largely ignored because, of course, it wasn't the trendy thing to say. The title of his article was, "Please Can We Stop Hyping Social as the Marketing Messiah?" His point was, if I look at how many blogs on the two big sites, TechCrunch and Mashable, talk about social versus search, it's a ridiculous proportion. In TechCrunch, 4 times more blogs are about social than about search. In Mashable.com, it's 58 times more about social than search. So let's think about this for a second. Search is delivering 30 times more customers who buy, but it's getting 1/60th of the coverage in the media. Doesn't make sense. It is the greatest act of overselling in the history of marketing. And by God, we've oversold some things in our time, have we not? Social media is about 5% of our budgets. It's less than 5% of impact, but it's getting 50% of the coverage in the media. And that coverage is almost exclusively positive. With the exception of my little rant here, when was the last time you read or heard anything negative about social media being underwhelming, or not right for your brand, or maybe not the right thing to do?